The iron gate was already open when I arrived, though every record I had checked insisted it should have been sealed shut. It stood crooked on one hinge, breathing softly in the wind, its rusted bars clicking together like teeth. The Victorian manor beyond it waited in silence. 3 stories of soot-dark brick and narrow windows, each pane clouded as if something inside had exhaled against the glass and never wiped it away. No lights, no movement, and no owner listed on any deed, registry, or probate file I could access. That detail alone should have stopped me, but it didn't. I stepped through the gate slowly, listening to the sound my boots made on the gravel path. Too loud, always too loud at places like this. The air smelled faintly of wet paper and old iron, a scent I'd come to associate with abandoned houses where time had been interrupted rather than erased. I reminded myself of the first rule, permission. I had it, at least in theory, granted by the local council after weeks of unanswered emails and one oddly brief phone call where a clerk told me, "No one's ever claimed it. Just don't take anything." That warning stayed with me longer than the permission itself. The manor was built sometime between 1878 and 1882, depending on which municipal ledger you believed. It appeared suddenly in tax records, already fully standing, and then remained curiously unchanged for decades. No renovations, no expansions, no listed heirs. Census documents showed families living nearby, but never inside. The address existed, but no names were ever attached to it. That absence was the second thing that drew me in. Houses usually accumulate people the way bones accumulate scratches. This one hadn't, and that wasn't the strangest part. As I climbed the stone steps to the front door, the temperature dropped sharply, like stepping into shade that wasn't there a moment before. The wood beneath my hand was colder than the air, the carved handle worn smooth by use that shouldn't have existed. Someone had opened this door many times. I paused, breathing slowly, scanning the porch ceiling for nests or cameras or anything that might suggest recent activity. Nothing. Only a long, dark stain near the threshold, as if rainwater had pooled there for years without evaporating. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a low, tired sound. Not a creak, but something closer to a sigh. Inside, the foyer stretched longer than it should have, the perspective slightly wrong, as if the walls were leaning inward by degrees too small to measure. Dust lay thick on the floor, but it wasn't evenly disturbed. There were narrow paths through it, subtle trails where someone, or something, had walked recently enough to leave an impression, but not recently enough to leave footprints. I stood still, listening. No wind, no animals, just the quiet hum of a structure settling under its own weight. The third rule echoed in my head: never go alone. I wasn't. Not entirely. A colleague waited outside the gate with the vehicle and radio contact, eyes on the house from a distance. Still, the interior felt immediately aware of my presence, the way some places do, like a held breath finally released. The smell inside was stronger now. Damp wood, mildew, and underneath it all, a faint sweetness I couldn't place. Old flowers, maybe, or something else entirely. I took photographs as I moved, documenting everything before touching a single surface. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing earlier patterns beneath, each layer from a different era, stacked like sediment. A hat stand near the wall held nothing, yet the floor beneath it was worn into a shallow depression, suggesting years of use. A mirror hung opposite the door, its glass darkened with age, reflecting the room dimly and inaccurately. When I shifted position, my reflection lagged by a fraction of a second. I told myself it was the light. I didn't entirely believe it. In the left corner of the foyer stood a narrow table with a ledger resting open on top. That should not have been there. Loose paper doesn't survive decades of abandonment. Not like this. The pages were yellowed but intact, filled with tight, careful handwriting. Names, dates, small notes in the margins. I didn't touch it. I photographed it from every angle instead, heart beating just a little faster with each image. There were names I recognized from nearby towns, people listed as having lived miles away during the same years. Some were marked with a symbol I couldn't interpret, and every few pages, a line was drawn through an entry so hard it had torn the paper. The staircase creaked when I tested the first step, the sound echoing upward into darkness. Before climbing, I glanced back at the door. It was still open, just as I'd left it. Light from outside stretched into the foyer like a lifeline. I made a mental note of its position. Always know your exit. The fourth rule, reconnaissance, was the reason I'd memorized the floor plan before entering. At least I thought I had. But standing there, I realized the interior didn't match the drawings exactly. Hallways were longer, doorways narrower, and the stairwell curved more sharply than any blueprint showed. Halfway up the stairs, the air changed again. Warmer this time. Stale. The smell of dust gave way to something heavier, almost human. The second-floor landing opened into a corridor lined with closed doors, each one painted the same dull green. I counted them. 7 on the left, 6 on the right. 13 total. The number felt deliberate. I reached for the nearest handle, then stopped. A sound drifted from further down the hall, faint but unmistakable. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. I stood perfectly still, listening. The tapping stopped. Then, after a pause long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it, it resumed, closer this time. Not louder, just nearer. I raised the camera again, documenting the corridor, the doors, the way the light from the stairwell seemed to dim with each step I took forward. My radio crackled softly at my side, my colleague checking in. I didn't answer immediately. I was counting the doors again. There were more now. That was when I realized the house wasn't just unowned. It was unrecorded. Not forgotten, not abandoned, but operating outside the systems meant to contain it. And I was standing inside, documenting something that did not want to be documented. The tapping stopped once more, replaced by a sound behind me, low and unmistakably deliberate. Footsteps. And that's when things started to turn darker. I didn't turn around immediately. Experience had taught me that reacting too quickly inside places like this often made things worse, not better. Instead, I focused on my breathing and listened carefully, counting the seconds between each sound. The footsteps behind me were slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of my own pulse rather than my movement. That detail unsettled me more than if they had rushed forward. Whatever was there wasn't chasing. It was pacing. When I finally turned, the corridor behind me was empty. The staircase stood exactly where it had been, its banister catching the weak light from below. Nothing moved. Nothing waited. Yet the sense of being observed didn't fade. It intensified, pressing in from the walls themselves. I raised the camera again, documenting the hallway from both directions, careful not to step backward too far. The dust patterns on the floor had changed. Thin lines cut through the layer I had seen moments earlier. as if something had been dragged lightly across the boards. I reminded myself of the rules again. Take nothing but photos. The urge to reach out, to confirm with my hands what my eyes were seeing, was strong. The green doors along the corridor looked identical now, their paint cracked in the same places, their brass handles dulled to the same muted sheen. Earlier, I was certain there had been 13. I counted again. 14, then 15. I stopped counting after that, afraid of what the next number might be. I chose one door at random and placed my ear against the wood without touching it. The smell was strongest here, the faint sweetness thickening until it almost burned the back of my throat. From inside came a low, continuous sound, like breath being drawn slowly through clenched teeth. I stepped back at once, pulse quickening despite my efforts to remain calm. This wasn't imagination. The sound had direction, depth, weight. The radio at my hip crackled again, louder this time. My colleague's voice came through distorted, stretched thin by interference. He asked if I was still on the first floor. I answered quietly, keeping my voice low, and told him I'd reached the upper level. There was a pause before he replied. When he did, his tone had changed. He said he could only see 2 stories from outside. There was no visible third floor, no attic windows, no upper gables, just a roofline that sloped too low to contain the space I was standing in. I didn't argue. I simply acknowledged the message and clipped the radio back into place. The house seemed to respond to the sound, the walls creaking softly as if adjusting. Somewhere further down the corridor, a door closed, not slammed, closed carefully, the way someone might shut it while trying not to wake a sleeping child. I moved forward, step by measured step, documenting everything. One door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness visible between it and the frame. I positioned the camera first, then pushed the door open with the back of my gloved hand. The room inside was a bedroom, preserved in a way that defied logic. A narrow bed stood against the wall, sheets neatly tucked, a faint indentation still visible in the pillow. A wardrobe in the corner stood open, its contents gone, but its interior lined with handwritten notes scratched directly into the wood. Dates, names. Short phrases repeated again and again, each carved deeper than the last. The window in the room was boarded from the inside. The wood darkened with age. No light entered. Yet the room wasn't entirely dark. A dull glow seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, illuminating the space just enough to see without casting shadows. That absence caught my attention immediately. Objects existed without anchoring themselves to the room. Depth felt wrong, distance unreliable. I backed out slowly and closed the door, marking its position mentally. When I turned back toward the staircase, it was gone. The corridor now extended further than before, bending slightly to the left. Panic threatened to surface, sharp and sudden. But I pushed it down. Panic makes noise. Noise attracts attention. Instead, I focused on methodical movement, documenting, narrating quietly into the recorder clipped to my jacket. Another sound emerged, closer now. A soft shuffling, accompanied by the faint rustle of fabric. I caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the corridor, something pale withdrawing behind a doorframe. I raised the camera just in time to capture the empty space it left behind. Reviewing the image seconds later, I noticed a blur in the corner of the frame, elongated and indistinct, like a figure caught mid-step. The house was rearranging itself around me. I could feel it, the subtle shifts underfoot, the way the air thickened with each wrong turn. This was no longer exploration. It was negotiation. And the manor was deciding how much further it would allow me to go. I stopped walking and stood perfectly still. The sounds ceased at once. Silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. From somewhere above, higher than any floor my colleague could see, came a single clear knock, slow and intentional, as if signaling that I was being invited upstairs. What happened next would make it impossible to pretend this place was simply abandoned. I didn't accept the invitation immediately. Places like this don't respond well to eagerness. I stood still beneath the unseen ceiling, listening to the silence stretch and settle, counting the seconds again until they lost meaning. The knock did not repeat itself. That restraint felt deliberate, as if the house understood patience better than most people ever do. I checked the time on my recorder. Several minutes had passed, though it felt shorter or longer. It was difficult to tell which. There was no visible stairway leading upward anymore, yet I knew the sound had come from above. I began walking slowly along the corridor, hand hovering near the wall without touching it. The texture of the air changed as I moved, growing cooler in some places, warmer in others, like pockets of breath trapped between the walls. The green doors thinned out, replaced by narrower frames painted white, their surfaces scratched and scarred, as if something had tried to claw its way through from the inside. At the far end of the corridor, I found what should not have existed, a staircase descending upward. The steps rose steeply, folding back over themselves in a way that made my eyes ache to follow. They were too narrow for comfort, their edges worn smooth in the center. Someone had climbed them many times. I paused at the base, documenting the structure from every angle, my heart beating slowly but heavily now. This was beyond architectural anomaly. This was intent. Before placing my foot on the first step, I checked the radio again. No signal. Just a low hiss of static that pulsed faintly, almost rhythmically. I turned it off. Sound mattered here. Every noise felt like a declaration. The moment my weight settled onto the stair, the house responded with a soft groan, not of strain but of acknowledgement. The temperature dropped sharply as I ascended, my breath fogging the air in front of me despite the enclosed space. Halfway up, I noticed the walls narrowing, closing in by inches with each step. The smell returned stronger than before. That same faint sweetness, now unmistakably floral and rotten at the same time. Old funerary arrangements, preserved too long. I forced myself to keep moving, documenting without hesitation, aware that stopping for too long might be interpreted as refusal. The staircase ended abruptly at a small landing with a single door. Unlike the others, this one was unpainted, its wood pale and unvarnished, as if it had never been finished. There was no handle. Only a shallow indentation where one might have been, worn smooth by repeated contact. I placed my palm just short of the surface and felt warmth radiating through the air. Something was on the other side, something aware of me. I didn't open the door. Instead, I circled the landing, confirming there were no other exits. The recorder in my pocket began to play back audio on its own, my earlier narration bleeding softly into the air. But layered beneath my voice was another sound, low and close, whispering in a cadence that mirrored my own pauses. I shut the device off, hands steady despite the surge of unease. When I turned back toward the door, it was open. Not wide, just enough to reveal a narrow room beyond. lit by a dull, ambient glow similar to the bedroom below. Inside stood a long table covered in ledgers identical to the one in the foyer. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Their spines labeled with years, spanning more than a century without gaps. At the far end of the room, a tall mirror leaned against the wall. Unlike the one downstairs, this glass was clear. Too clear. I stepped inside, every instinct warning me not to touch anything. The air was warmer here, heavy with the smell of paper and dried flowers. Names filled the open ledgers, written in the same careful hand. Some I recognized now. Locals, travelers, individuals whose deaths had been recorded elsewhere under unrelated circumstances. Each entry ended the same way, with a symbol identical to those I'd seen before. Completion. The mirror drew my attention against my will. My reflection stood within it, perfectly still. Even when I shifted slightly. Behind that unmoving version of myself, the room extended further than it should have, rows of shelves receding into darkness. I realized then what the house had been doing all along. It wasn't hiding its occupants. It was recording them, preserving their presence long after their bodies had gone elsewhere. A sound came from behind me, the door closing. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd find. The landing was gone, the staircase erased. Only the room remained, quiet and waiting. This was the moment I understood why no owner had ever been listed. Ownership implies control, and nothing here had ever belonged to anyone who walked in willingly. The door did not lock. That was the first thing I noticed. It simply ceased to exist as an option, its outline softening until it blended into the wall like an old scar. I stood still in the center of the ledger room, breathing shallowly, listening for any sign that the house intended to react to panic. It didn't. Instead, it settled into a deeper quiet, the kind that feels curated rather than empty. I approached the nearest table, careful to keep my hands visible in front of me, palms open. The rule echoed again: take nothing but photos. I documented the ledgers one by one, noting how the handwriting never changed across decades. Same pressure, same angle, same pauses between strokes. No aging, no deterioration in style. Only the names shifted, cycling through generations. Sometimes repeating family lines I recognized from local archives. Parents, children, grandchildren. All recorded here, regardless of where they were officially said to have lived or died. One ledger lay open to a blank page. The year at the top matched the present. That detail tightened something in my chest. I photographed it from a distance and stepped back. The mirror across the room responded immediately, my reflection finally moving, but not in sync. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then, slowly, it raised one hand and pressed it flat against the glass from the inside. I felt the pressure in the air before I saw anything else change. The shelves behind my reflection were filling in, ledgers appearing where empty space had been seconds before. The house was updating itself, recording the moment. I spoke quietly into the recorder again, stating the time, my location, and my intent to exit. The words felt important. Declarations matter in places governed by rules older than law. A sound carried through the room, low and resonant, like a deep breath being released through the walls. The mirror's surface rippled once, then stilled. My reflection stepped back, allowing me to see what stood behind it. The outline of a staircase descending into light. An exit. Not the one I had entered through, but one offered deliberately. I understood the implication immediately. The house was not trapping me. It was concluding my entry. I turned away from the mirror without approaching it. Instead, I followed the sensation of direction more than sight, moving toward where the staircase should have been. The room thinned, its details fading like an image overexposed. Then my foot met solid stone, real stone, cold, familiar. I emerged into the foyer, the front door standing open just as before. Daylight spilled across the floor, dissolving the strange geometry of the interior. The ledger table was gone. The mirror dulled. Dust lay evenly across the floor, unbroken. I stepped outside without looking back. The iron gate creaked shut behind me on its own, settling into place with finality. Outside, my colleague stared at the house in silence. He said I had been inside for just under 12 minutes. My recorder showed nearly an hour. The photographs, when reviewed later, revealed no ledgers, no mirror, no staircase, only empty rooms and collapsed corridors. Except for one image, a single photo taken in the foyer, showing an open book on a narrow table. On the visible page was a name I recognized. Mine. The manor still has no owner on record, no listed occupants, no explanation that satisfies zoning boards or historians. But it remains standing, unchanged, waiting, and I follow the rules now more carefully than ever. Because some places don't want to be owned. They want to be remembered. When I left that village, I didn't take a single object with me. No artifacts, no proof that could be held in the hand. Only documentation, memories, and an understanding I hadn't had before. Not all haunted places are violent. Some are methodical. They don't chase intruders away. They catalog them. In the weeks that followed, I checked property records again. The manor's address still existed, but the file had been altered, not erased, adjusted, entire decades compressed into single lines. Names missing, dates smoothed over. It was as if the system itself resisted holding on to the truth for too long. I've learned to accept that some stories are meant to remain incomplete. The unease they leave behind is the evidence. The feeling that something watched, listened, and decided you were finished before you were ready to be. That Victorian manor taught me that survival isn't always about escape. Sometimes it's about being dismissed. If you find yourself drawn to places without names, without owners, without clear histories, remember the rules. Obtain permission, even if it feels symbolic. Take nothing but photos, never go alone. And always, always learn as much as you can before you step inside. Because not every door closes behind you. Some close after they've finished writing you down. If you want to hear more true stories like this, real places, real records, and the quiet truths hidden between them, follow the channel and subscribe. There are many locations still waiting,